With the Dune trilogy finally crossing the billion-dollar mark, we now have a massive new franchise in the world of Hollywood. A franchise that I expect to probably span multi-decades. Even after Denis stops making these films, we're probably going to get tons of Dune content. We even have a Dune HBO show coming out later this year about the Bene Gesserits. So with that, and now us living in a world of Hollywood where franchises kind of run the world. You have the MCU, you have a bunch of other franchises that make tons of money at the box office. I sort of wanted to do a deep dive on the best and the worst franchises Hollywood has to offer. So we're going to start here today. I'm going to list off the franchises that I wish would go away. These are movie franchises that I just do not like, or movie franchises that I wish would be better. So I'm going to go through all of these, and I want to make a point before I start. These are not genuinely the worst of all time. I'm sure there's other movie franchises that I just haven't seen, so let me know if I've missed anything down below. And also, you might disagree with me. You might love some of these franchises. That's okay. Let me know that down below as well. But I'm just going to give my reasoning for why each of them has made this list. So we're going to start off with The Matrix, and yes, The Matrix is a movie franchise that had so much potential. Obviously, when the first Matrix movie came out, it was revolutionary, both in its visuals, its CGI, its effects, its action, and its mind-bending plot that really connected with a lot of people in that day and age and kind of opened their eyes in a very thematic way. It's a movie that's really huge. It has a great performance by Keanu Reeves. The movie is just absolutely legendary in culture, and people love it to death. Even today, I know a lot of people that say it's the greatest movie like ever. But then they made 3 more of them, and each one got worse and worse and worse, and this is one of those franchises that I think needs to go away and probably should have went away after the first movie. So obviously when you look at The Matrix, you get the first sequel, The Matrix Reloaded, which is obviously probably the best of the sequels. It's a standard movie that definitely waters down a lot of what made the first movie work, but you could definitely tell if you're watching this trilogy, the original trilogy for the first time, that there was something off about this movie, and it kind of expanded the world and expanded the lore, but maybe not in the way that a lot of fans were expecting and not in the way that made it more interesting. Then obviously you get The Matrix Revolutions, that is just, to me, a dog water movie. This is a movie that I just do not like at all, and it's the one that was like the cherry on top of sort of ruining the Matrix franchise. It just was way too expansive with how it was trying to build up this world from the first movie. A lot of the fights, especially with Agent Smith, just, I feel like the visual style kind of lost its touch by this movie. This is one I'm just not a big fan of. And then a couple years ago, we had the resurrection of The Matrix, which was called The Matrix Resurrections. And I gotta be honest, I was really excited for this movie. The Wachowskis were coming back. It had been a very, very long time. The trailer for this was awesome. And I just thought, man, after the disaster that was The Matrix 2 and 3, maybe a 4th movie, a resurrection, a revival of the franchise could work. Nope, it doesn't. It doesn't work. Kill it with fire. No more Matrix movies. Let's end it. Let's pretend like the last 3 don't exist and just leave the first movie by itself. We don't need reboots. We don't need remakes. We don't need anything else. It's done. It's finished. Leave Keanu alone. Let him go make John Wick movies. At number 9 is Terminator. Now, this is a movie franchise that I personally absolutely adore. I think the original trilogy of these movies is almost perfect. Even the 3rd movie, which a lot of people don't like, I still kind of enjoy. I think it's a really solid trilogy. Obviously, you have the original Terminator movie directed by James Cameron, which is a very simple movie about a killer robot that comes back in time to kill this chick before she gives birth to her son, who's going to be a messiah-like hero in the future. Very simple, very basic, but very awesome, and it sucks you in. You have Arnold Schwarzenegger playing this evil monster Terminator. You have Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor. You have kind of a really decent love story that's mixed in here that ends up becoming very meta. This is a movie that I actually think was underrated when it comes to big franchise movies, of course, because the second movie, which I'm about to talk about, is so much bigger. But this movie is really great, and it is honestly the start of what could have been a cool franchise. And then you get Terminator 2 Judgment Day, obviously the movie that if you grew up in the 90s, almost every 90s kid that I know, 90s person, thinks that this is like the greatest movie ever. It's the movie that really solidified James Cameron as the king of sequels, like if you really think about it. I mean, you got this, you got Aliens, you got Avatar 2. Guy knows how to make a sequel. This movie flips the script as we follow a young John Connor, and obviously we have Arnold Schwarzenegger is actually playing like a good robot in this movie. This movie's really great, it's really awesome, and it's probably where the franchise could have ended, or at least the next journeys of this franchise probably should have done something different. Instead, we got Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, which obviously follows John Connor as well, and we kind of see the fall of humanity. This movie is just a lot slower than the previous two. It was definitely missing the charm of James Cameron's ability from the directing chair. It definitely missed James Cameron. Just easily the weakest movie of the original trilogy, but there was hope. There was hope. And then you know what happened to the Terminator franchise after that? It actually made the right decision. It took a big swing and a big step at becoming something different. In 2009, we got Terminator Salvation, and although this movie is a big stinking pile of dog poop, I will give him credit. It is a very different movie, and it's the only movie, I think, in the entire franchise that tried to be something different. This movie follows John Connor after the fall of the world, and we get to see them in this post-nuclear war world where we're fighting the machines, and you have the resistance, and that's really cool and was a great idea. Unfortunately, it just was not executed well, and you get a really boring movie. So where did the franchise go from here? How do we continue to build the Terminator franchise? How do we do something different and better and amazing? Well, the answer to that is Terminator Genisys, which is essentially just like a remake of the original Terminator. It's not good. Terminator Genisys is essentially a redo of Terminator 1, if not kind of a redo or a reboot. It's a really, really weird movie that essentially tells a very similar story. You have the love story here between Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese, played by Emily Clarke and Jai Courtney, who I do think actually brings some charm to this role, but this movie is just kind of empty. It's devoid of anything original, unique, and it's very clear that this movie was made to sort of appease that old-time Terminator fan base. It just doesn't really work well. And it was very clear that this franchise either needed a very, very long break, it needed a reset, or it needed to go away entirely. So what do? They made this piece of shit, which was somehow even worse than the previous one. This movie actually made the smart decision of bringing Linda Hamilton back as Sarah Connor, which could have made for a real good nostalgia bait type thing. It also came out the same year that something like Halloween 2019 came out. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Spoiler. But unfortunately, this movie just ends up being a retread of a lot of the old stuff in the Terminator franchise. It doesn't do anything new or unique. It pisses off longtime fans of the franchise in the first 2 minutes of the film, and it's just a movie that's a complete mess. And now this franchise is kind of left in limbo. So where do we go from here? Nowhere! That's where you go. This is a franchise that was built on very simple stories, a very simple plot line that if done enough times is going to run its course and become boring. So what do? You stop making movies. We don't need any more from this franchise unless it's going to be a wild departure from what has been done before, which I just don't see them actually doing and taking that risk. So no more Terminator movies, please. Next up is Jurassic Park, and what can you say about Jurassic Park besides the fact that it is an awesome, amazing movie and an awesome, amazing idea that makes for a kick-ass theme park at Universal. It's great, I love it. But another thing you can say about Jurassic Park is that they have not made a good Jurassic Park movie since the original Steven Spielberg movie. This franchise is a steaming pile of shit when you look at it. Obviously, the original Jurassic Park, directed by Steven Spielberg, in the same year that he also directed Schindler's List, one of the greatest accomplishments by any filmmaker ever. It's kind of insane that he was able to pull it off. Is a classic. It's a modern-day classic. It's a very simple story about a theme park where dinosaurs arise, and people are kind of creating dinosaurs. They're playing God, and it's the question of, should we have this power, and should we be creating these monsters, essentially? It's a horror, sci-fi, action thriller. It's a great movie. It builds tension and suspense. It's got amazing effects, a great score. And if it was a standalone movie, it would have been one of the all-time greats. But they watered it down with a bunch of these garbage sequels. First off, we start with The Lost World, which, give it credit, was actually directed by Steven Spielberg, and I honestly believe it's one of the biggest stinkers of his near-perfect career. The Lost World is not a great movie. It's a very dull retreading of the first movie, and it's a movie that just does not work at all for me. And then Spielberg got tired of the franchise, so they brought somebody else in to make Jurassic Park 3. This is another movie that also does not work for me. I will say, it's one of the more fun movies of the franchise just because it's short. It's kind of got a brisk pace. It works a little bit better than some of the other movies in this franchise, but it's still nowhere near what that first movie does. It kind of retreads a lot of the same themes, a lot of the same ideas, and that big surprise, those big epic, reveals in the first movie of seeing these dinosaurs, seeing these parks. At this point, it's watered down. It's another movie franchise, and you'll see as I talk about the next three, that it was built on a very large scale, but with very small ideas and themes. We're studying very small ideas. It's very simple, right? It's not this big thematical, hugely complex story, narrative, and world that needs to be broken down into so many different films. At its core, it's very, very simple. So when you make more and more of it, just retreading it, it gets watered down, it becomes bad. The franchise took a much-needed 15-year break, and it probably should have stayed away, because then we get Jurassic World. I'm gonna be honest, I don't hate Jurassic World. I think it's probably the second best movie in the franchise. I think it's cool. I think it took the franchise in an interesting spot, although it was a complete retreading and retelling of the original Jurassic Park movie, essentially a reboot, remake, whatever you want to call it. It's pretty much the same thing. I actually thought seeing this story renewed almost 20, 30 years later was actually, it worked for me as a 14-year-old seeing this movie in theaters for the first time. Music was great. Chris Pratt was just oozing with charisma. I enjoyed this movie, but yet again, it didn't really offer anything new to the franchise. Then we got Fallen Kingdom, which is one of the worst movies I have ever sat through in movie theaters. This thing is a stinking heap of crap. I will never rewatch this ever again. So they take the cool, interesting, sort of charismatic essence of what was the first Jurassic World movie, which was a retelling of the original, but a well-done retelling, and now they've ran out of ideas. So now we get, like, dinosaur auctions and Chris Pratt running around rooftops of buildings fighting dinosaurs. On paper, maybe that stuff works. The movie just ends up becoming dull, empty, boring, and a CGI mess that is just not worth watching. And then you get Jurassic World Dominion. Do I even have to say anything? It's been well documented how bad this movie is. It's almost 3 hours long. It's an absolute disaster. And this should be where the franchise ends. And I thought Hollywood got the message. I thought they were like, final nail in the coffin, no more Jurassic Park stuff. But we're getting more Jurassic Park, baby. Next year, Gareth Edwards, let's go! Ah! I've heard it might be called Jurassic City. It's gonna be starring Scarlett Johansson, and spoiler alert, it's probably gonna suck. Just being honest, guys. Don't get your hopes up. This is a franchise that needs to go. We don't need any more of this. Unless Steven Spielberg wants to come back and reinvent it, we don't need more giant dinosaurs. The next one is actually one that kind of hurts me. It hurts me to rank it here because I do enjoy a lot of these movies. I enjoy the charm. But the reason I'm ranking this franchise here is because it could be so much better. For some reason, they just keep fucking it up. I'm talking about Resident Evil. Now, of course, listen, Resident Evil has a long track record of amazing, amazing games that I am not talking about. The Resident Evil game franchise is alive and well, and they should keep making more of them because they keep hitting it out of the park. There's just the movies and even the TV franchise of Resident Evil. Now, of course, during the early 2000s into the late 2010s, we got the Resident Evil movie franchise, which was a mixed bag. The original Resident Evil movie starring Mia Jovovich was actually a pretty fun, entertaining action movie. It's a movie that takes place going through the Umbrella Corps facility that's under Raccoon City. There's a lot of creeps, a lot of weird stuff. It's got an early 2000s sci-fi vibe. This is a movie that I loved in my childhood, and I think it's a good introduction to this world. And then you have Resident Evil Apocalypse. That takes everything that worked in the first movie and just kind of throws it out the window. You get more cringy, bad CGI action, a watered-down script that doesn't really work. They sort of try retreading a lot of the stuff that happens in the original games, but it just doesn't hit as hard in live action. This is a movie that just focused way too much on action and less on scares. It's not a great movie. And then we get Resident Evil Extinction, another movie that I sort of enjoyed as a child just because I thought the world that this movie existed in, like that kind of this vast desert with zombies, creeped me out a little bit. This is another movie, though, just kind of becomes over-convoluted in its plot that they've been building over 3 movies. The plot becomes so convoluted, which is so weird, because in the video games, the plot of a lot of those games are very, very simple. For example, Resident Evil 4, you're Leon Kennedy, you gotta go save the president's daughter, there's some bad guys you gotta shoot. You really don't need to know much more than that. Of course, there is a deeper story going on, more things to figure out and learn, but you don't have to. These movies, you kind of have to, and it's just so convoluted and so dumb, and it didn't need to be, and this movie is definitely an example of that. It doesn't work. Then you have Afterlife, a movie that I'm not even going to talk about because I don't remember anything that happens in this movie. I just know it's another retreading of the franchise, of the first 3 movies. I remember hating it. Then we get to Resident Evil Retribution, the 5th movie. This one I don't hate. I actually kind of like this one. It's a cool idea. It's another movie that's kind of like the first one. It's sort of a retreading of the first one where they're going through this Umbrella facility, and I always thought this movie was cool. The Umbrella facility was really well built. The production design was kind of cool. Some of the action sequences work. I thought it had the best performances of the series. Not a great movie. Mostly a retreading, but probably the second best of the whole series. It had a really cool ending as well. And then you get the final movie, which is properly titled The Final Chapter, another movie that just kind of throws together this convoluted story and wraps a nice bow around it. It has an okay ending. The movie becomes very complicated. You're just so uninterested by the end of it, and it becomes a chore if you want to sit through all 6 of these movies. It just completely loses what worked about the original movie, which was just kind of like this creepy vibe, this action movie of slithering through this facility, having gore, violence. All that stuff worked. It didn't work after that because they decided to stretch out what should be a simple story. You should be seeing a trend here. Then, of course, we've got a couple terrible TV shows that I'm not even going to really go into. But the one thing I'll say about Resident Evil, this is a franchise that I will not say I think should go away. All these other franchises so far and some of the ones ahead of it, I'm going to say, stop making these movies. This one, I'm not going to say that. I think there is a proper Resident Evil film franchise to be built. If they did proper adaptations of the games, like a straight-up Resident Evil 4 remake into a movie, or a straight Resident Evil 2 remake into a movie, I think it could work, because a lot of the stuff in those games is really creepy and really cool, but it would have to completely change from these hardcore action movies into straight-up horror. Let's make a good horror Resident Evil movie about a dude in a village getting attacked by a bunch of scary bad dudes, and he's got to fight his way out. That would be simple. That would be great. It would make money. I'm willing to write it, Hollywood. I'm sitting right here in my room. I'm unemployed, so come on. It's tough out here, guys. Next up is Halloween, and unlike the other franchises, I'm not gonna break down every movie in this one because there are way too many. And they're all pretty terrible, except for like 3 of them. Let's just be honest, and I know you're gonna be like, Halloween's a great franchise. There's like 3 good movies, alright? Let's just be real here. First Halloween, obviously a classic. Jamie Lee Curtis is awesome. It introduced us to the great score, to the incredibly terrifying character of Michael Myers, who is essentially this shape, this evil force that just kills and kills and kills. It's a terrifying movie that sort of revolutionized the slasher genre, revolutionized movies like this. There's been a million spin-offs and recreations of movies similar to this because of this movie. It's great. It's a classic. I even like Halloween 2. I think it's good. I think it's a solid follow-up that feels more like a part 2 than a straight-up sequel, and I think it goes to an interesting place. But then we get Halloween 3, 4, 5, 20, 50. They're all miserable. They're all pretty bad. They're fun at times, but they're just kind of retreads, and when they do try to take a step to become something different and sometimes more supernatural, they just don't really work well. Then, of course, you get the Rob Zombie remake films, which I will say definitely brought a different vibe than the original Michael Myers movies, and I did sort of like them when they were coming out. I was like, this is different. I enjoy the vibe. Michael Myers is a big, broody, scary dude versus kind of this quiet, methodical, thin guy who's just kind of creepy. I liked it. The films aren't really great. Then they brought it back, Halloween 2019. Good movie. I enjoyed it. Or maybe it came out in 2018. Whatever year it came out, I enjoyed the movie. It was a good reboot or relaunch of the series, although yet again, like many of the films on this list, it's a retread of the original Halloween. It doesn't really offer anything new or original or anything. It's just kind of a retread of nostalgia, which is why it doesn't entirely work, and it's why the sequels, Halloween Kills, also didn't work, and why Halloween Ends was one of the worst movies of that year. It's really bad. And now they're making more Halloween stuff, a TV show or more movies, and let me ask you this. All these Halloween fans out there that are going to be mad for me mentioning this franchise because they love Halloween, they love Michael Myers. What more can you possibly do with this franchise, with this character, with this world that we haven't seen before? And I know for a fact your answer is nothing, because there's nothing more you can do other than let's come up with new ideas with new characters. Well, then it's not Halloween, is it? So no more Halloween, please, Hollywood. We don't need more of this either. Here's a controversial one, and just to be careful, I'm going to specify the company ahead of the franchise. Not the franchise as a whole, but the modern version of it. And this is Disney's Star Wars. Please, dear God, if there is a God out there, I don't know who's religious watching this, I don't know what any of you guys believe in, and I don't really care, but if you're religious, pray to God, because I'm trying to end Disney's Star Wars. Please! I can't take any more! It's just every year they keep hitting me with nonsense and terribleness that has ruined my childhood. So let's just start off, let's talk about the sequels, okay? They started great. The Force Awakens, I loved it. It was like the best movie theater experience ever. But let's just be real, it's a retread and a remake of the old movies. The Force Awakens is essentially just The New Hope with a new coat of paint. That's all it is. But it worked in 2015, I'll give him credit. The Last Jedi is a disaster of a film. It just does not work really at all. It ruins the character of Luke Skywalker. The film also ruins the track record of Star Wars, where there's a time jump between each movie. It's essentially just a part 2 of The Force Awakens, but it also doesn't follow a lot of the stuff that The Force Awakens did right. It sort of becomes its own thing, which I respect Rian Johnson for trying to do, but it doesn't work. They kill off Snoke. They do a bunch of terrible other things. They set up new mysteries that didn't need to be set up, and the movie's just a mess. You have Rose and Finn that have a dumb romance. It's not a good movie. And then you get to The Rise of Skywalker, which I'm not going to talk about in depth. I'm not really going to talk about it at all because I'm sick of talking about it on this channel. If you watch my channel, it's my least favorite movie of all time. So, yeah, it ruined my childhood. And what have they done since? You know, they've done Rogue One. Rogue One was good. They did the Han Solo movie, which is alright. What else have they done? The Mandalorian, okay. Season 1 and 2 were good. Season 3 was not good. They did the Obi-Wan Kenobi show because they thought, if The Rise of Skywalker didn't ruin Joe's childhood enough, now let's ruin Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan character. Fuck it. You had the Boba Fett show, which sucked because they took this badass, awesome character and made him into like a wholesome, like dad-like figure who's just this really nice guy, because that's what people think about when they thought of Boba fucking Fett. They think of this nice, wholesome guy. Now we have this new show coming out called The Acolyte, which of course the filmmaker involved in this show famously said this about George Lucas. So, God, please make it stop. Disney has done nothing with this franchise other than ruin it. They've done nothing. And yes, I know there have been a few good projects, I'll give them credit, but they have taken this franchise, which you gotta remember in 2015 was probably the biggest franchise in all of Hollywood, and they have taken the biggest absolute donkey shit all over it and have ruined it, I think, forever. It should go away. Let's stop doing Star Wars for like at least 20, 30 years, and then when Disney is sold to somebody else or whatever, we can bring it back. Now, I'm sort of cheating with this next one because this is a franchise that sort of has disappeared, or at least a film style that's disappeared. I'm talking about Paranormal Activity, and as a whole kind of found footage stuff, and I'm not really a hater of found footage movies. I think found footage movies could be really cool. It's an idea that when done right, I think makes for some of the most unique filmmaking in the world. Most recently, we had a film called Late Night with the Devil, which I gave a 5 out of 5, and it's very similar to a found footage type movie. Paranormal Activity franchise is the movie franchise that really exploded this type of film. We got so many found footage movies after these came out because they were incredibly successful financially and they were very cheap to make. Now, I'll admit these movies scared the shit out of me as a kid. They scared the living shit out of me. Just gonna be honest. I didn't rewatch them for this video because they scare the shit out of me now. But regardless, we gotta be honest here. The first Paranormal Activity, it's a really good movie. It's really original, well thought out, and it's really freaky. I'll even say the second movie is also really freaky. It kind of expands on the first movie. How? Bigger house, more characters, scarier ghosts. It's pretty much the only difference, but it's got some really creepy moments. I'll even say number 3, kind of interesting as well. It also expands the story. How? Bigger house, more characters, prequel. I actually think the first 2 things might be a lie on that. I think it might be a smaller house and less characters. But either way, it was a prequel, and its finale was pretty scary. You actually have a really good trilogy of horror movies there. But then they kept going. You have the 4th movie, which I remember being an absolute disaster. It's sort of a sequel to number 2, but not really a sequel to number 2. You have a new family, a bigger house. There's some creepy moments in it, but it just ends up being a retread of some of the things that worked about the previous 3 movies. Doesn't really do anything original. Then you have a spin-off, Paranormal Activity, The Marked Ones. Another movie that had one scene that freaked me out, but the rest of it just, I didn't really get the point of the story they were trying to tell. It kind of became over-convoluted. Then they made The Ghost Dimension, which was the worst of the franchise. This movie was such a dumpster fire, I don't even want to talk about it. And then a couple years ago, they tried kind of booting the universe. They had a movie called Next of Kin, which was not a Paranormal Activity movie. It was just a horror movie that they put the Paranormal Activity title on to sell tickets, but it was not a Paranormal Activity movie, so it's not even worth mentioning. This is a franchise that I think ran its course. I think it's a style of movie that if you have a unique filmmaker come in and try to do something different with it, could be interesting, but probably one that we should just let die and let live in history as being a very unique and innovative horror movie franchise. Good job, Paranormal Activity. Next up is another one I'm sort of cheating with, mainly because it's really not a current franchise. I mean, there hasn't been like a movie or anything with this in a while. Of course, I'm talking about Twilight, one of the biggest book series in the world during my childhood, only second to something like Harry Potter, a movie franchise and a book franchise that would probably appear on a different list similar to this. One with the word best in the title. Now listen, I can't speak on the books for Twilight. I am not the target audience of the Twilight books, obviously. I never read them, nor do I plan to read them. So I can only talk about the movies, of which I haven't seen in a very long time, but I have seen, and they are not good. They're not my favorite. I don't love the Twilight movies at all. Obviously, we start with the first Twilight, which stars Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart, 2 actors of which took so long to resurrect their careers after this series, especially Robert Pattinson, who, although I do love his performance in these films because it's hilarious, plays this really moody, dark, grudgy, edgy vampire dude, and it just kind of gave him that Cloud from Final Fantasy VII type of vibe, except a lot worse. And obviously, it took a long time to get away from that, and finally he's resurrected his career to where now he plays Batman, where he plays a dark, edgy, sort of Cloud from Final Fantasy type character. Wait, what? So this is good, but this is bad. Hollywood, man, it makes no sense. The first movie's fine. It sets up the story well, I guess, if you're into this kind of stuff. The second movie, which I think was called Eclipse or A New Dawn, or I don't know, one of the movies was called one of them was called another thing. Very forgettable movies, very boring. They drag out. The story is atrocious. Then we get to number 4, which is probably the funniest one of all of them. A lot of goofy shit that happens in this movie, but it's still not very good. It's a part 1 of this is kind of when Hollywood, and they're still sort of into it, of splitting the final book in series into 2 parts, which just never really works. Apparently splitting the first book into 2 parts works. Dune, maybe. So maybe we should do that more. Maybe when they redo Harry Potter, the Sorcerer's Stone could be 2 parts. That would be terrible. I'm sorry for even mentioning that idea. Please do not take that idea, Warner Brothers. But yeah, both parts were really bad. The finale was bad. Twilight sucks. Do people really like Twilight? It's not a continuing franchise. It has ended. Except, wait, they're making an animated show. Okay, we'll see. I'll give it a chance. Maybe. Probably not. I'll watch it. Next up is Transformers, and this one probably should be number 1, but I personally, I have a grudge with the number 1 spot, so we'll get to that. But Transformers is probably the worst continuing franchise working in Hollywood, outside of maybe the superhero stuff that I decided not to talk about. There's no superhero stuff on this list. Just be prepared for that. I don't want to annoy anybody too much, but Transformers is a really, really bad franchise at the moment. A franchise that either needs a complete reinvention or it just needs to go away. Now let's go through the history of Transformers. Obviously, we have the first Transformers movie from 2007, which was directed by Michael Bay, which was an explosively amazing action film. It was very unique. Introducing Transformers into live action was so cool at the time. I loved this movie as a child. The CGI was really ahead of its time. Of course, you have the Michael Bay-isms with the explosions. You have a very simple story that works, a good villain in Megatron, a really good soundtrack. You have Linkin Park with some music in this thing. It's just a really solid movie. Then you get the second one, Revenge of the Fallen, another film that not a lot of people like. I personally liked it as a kid. I think it has its quips to it. I think it's kind of funny. It sort of expands the world. We have a big battle in Egypt on the pyramids. It's got an interesting ending, a really bad villain. It's a movie that definitely struggles compared to the first movie, but a lot of different aspects, especially with pacing, and it's kind of a cringy comedy in retrospect, but it's still a movie that I enjoy. And then you have the trilogy ender and Transformers Dark of the Moon. A great finale, I think, personally. A really good trilogy ender. You have this gigantic set-piece battle in Chicago, which literally is like 2 hours of this frickin' movie. You have a pretty good villain in Sentinel Prime. Megatron's back, and he's doing some cool, badass shit. Patrick Dempsey's in the movie. It's not one of the pros, but it's just a really good trilogy ender. It sets up it ends and it ends, right? Like, in its ending, you could really say this is it for Transformers. They could have ended it there. We would have been all happy, right? It's a solid movie. I enjoyed it. But then Michael Bay, he didn't want to stop. He didn't know when to call it quits, so he made a fourth movie, which is called, I don't remember what the fuck it's called. Age of Extinction, there you go. He brings in Marky Mark, and we have a new movie, and this is where the franchise just proved that it did not work anymore. And I'll give Michael Bay credit, he tried bringing in certain aspects from the original Transformers source material that could have worked, like the Dinobots, Galvatron, interesting stuff they hadn't done yet that at times was kind of cool, but overall you get another sort of basic Transformers story where you focus on Marky Mark's character who nobody cares about, and his daughter, who's insanely hot, and that's the only reason her character's in this movie, and the only thing her character has going for her, because Michael Bay, a little bit sexist. I will say this idea of Transformers being on the run and being hunted down was kind of cool. I think Lockdown was a decent villain, but overall this film just didn't really introduce anything new to the franchise, which is why Michael Bay had to make another movie, just to prove, like, hey, I could still make an interesting Transformers movie. Give me one more chance. Then we got The Last Knight, which is one of the worst movies ever. It's just a terrible, terrible movie. I cannot tell you really anything that happened in this movie because I don't remember anything from it. I know Marky Mark's in it. I know Anthony Hopkins somehow got convinced to do this movie, which is just so below him. The CGI was really bad in here. They tried bringing in Unicron or whatever. There's like a god transformer. Megatron is back for the 50th time. This thing just didn't work. It was really bad. Should have killed the franchise, but then they said, hey, we're going to try reinventing it. We're going to make this movie called Bumblebee, which I actually kind of enjoyed. I thought it was a new step for the franchise. It sort of reset things. It told a very personal character story between Bumblebee and Haley Steinfeld, and it was a buddy cop type movie. John Cena played a bad guy, and it was a lot of fun in it. I like Bumblebee. I thought it was the right direction to go with this franchise. Smaller stories, no epic scale, no ridiculous Michael Bay-isms, and I liked it. And then what did they do last year? They make the worst movie in the franchise, Transformers Rise of the Beast. Piece of crap. It's a movie without Michael Bay that just delves into all the generic, big, gigantic CGI action superhero tropes that Hollywood is suffering from right now. The movie has a nothing plot, nothing human characters. All the Transformers are just CGI fucking nothings. They have nothing going for them that's interesting whatsoever. You get a generic bad guy that nobody cares about. They bring in Unicron, like, who gives a shit? A big final battle that was all generated on a computer. It might have been made by AI. Who knows at this point? It's forgettable. It's boring. It's everything that I personally despise about modern Hollywood. Movies like this, I just cannot stand. And it ends on a cliffhanger and a setup for a G.I. Joe Transformers movie that not a single person on this planet asks for. And God, I hope it's not made because they need to stop with this franchise. Except for the animated movie they're making. That actually sounds like it could be good. Let's stop making live-action Transformers until they really reevaluate what this franchise should be, because right now it's terrible. Here's my number one spot. I know I'm about to, ruffle some feathers here. I'm about to make some people mad, because this franchise, I will say, is very popular. It makes a lot of money, all right? A lot of people love it. This is my personal opinion. It's my least favorite franchise in Hollywood. I'm going to make my point as to why I think that, and then you could tell me why I'm wrong. And it is the modern-day Godzilla franchise in the United States. I want to make that clear, because Godzilla Minus One is a fucking masterpiece. It is a great movie. I'm not talking about Godzilla as a whole. I'm talking about the MonsterVerse, the United States of America's Godzilla. Because all of these movies are just the worst for me. I think they are the worst that Hollywood has to offer in modern movies. I think they're terrible. Except for the first two. Godzilla 2014, the first big Hollywood Godzilla movie we had gotten in a very long time. It was directed by Gareth Edwards, who is a decent filmmaker, and I like this movie. It brought Godzilla to scale. This motherfucker was meaty, he was huge, and he was terrifying. I remember the trailers for this thing, where I was just like, oh my god, like, this guy is crazy. This movie's gonna be insane. A lot of the human story in this movie was somewhat interesting. This sort of conspiracy with Monarch. You have Bryan Cranston in the movie, who was just coming off Breaking Bad, so he was at his hottest. Yeah, this movie had a lot going for it. It was creepy at times. I think it drags a little too long. I think a lot of the stuff in the latter half of the movie doesn't work. It becomes too big CGI monstrosity fest. Like, it just doesn't completely work for me personally, but it's a solid start. Then you get Kong Skull Island. My opinion, it's the best movie in the franchise so far. We go to Skull Island and we meet King Kong, and you get a story with the culture of Skull Island. You get a really awesome, massive version of King Kong. Tom Hiddleston's here, and he's great. Kurt Russell, I believe? No, Kurt Russell's in a different project. My bad. But Tom Hiddleston is in this movie, and he's really good in it. This movie, I just remember being a lot of fun. It kind of had that 70s-esque vibe to it, and it was a solid movie in this universe. But here is where the franchise went to poop, because they kept making movies. We didn't need more movies. You just could have done something different, but they kept making movies, and we get Godzilla King of the Monsters, which is a nothing movie. I'm sorry. This might be your thing. If you like 2 hours of people talking about nonsense and CGI nothingness, then this is the movie for you. For me, it's not my thing, all right? I could not tell you a single thing about any character in this movie. I know Millie Bobby Brown's in it. I don't remember any of the work she did in it, but I know she's in it. I don't know what the story of this movie is. Could not tell you. I know Godzilla fights Mothra and King Hydra, and that's it. And it's not great. The CGI is, it's well done. The VFX is fine, but it's just nothing. It's a nothing burger for me. And to me, the event of King Kong versus this big monster and setting it up kind of like a boxing match, and you got to see this movie to see King Kong or Godzilla fight this monster. Like, it doesn't work for me, and this movie was the perfect example of it, and it was never more kind of broadly shown to me until we got Godzilla vs. Kong, a movie that I was a little bit intrigued by. It's a big event film. Godzilla fighting King fucking Kong. This is insane. It's a big crossover. And then I saw it, and I fell asleep in the movie theater. So I don't remember anything from this movie, because I slept through the entire thing. I was bored out of my mind. It's another movie of 2 hours listening to humans talk about nothing, and then like 20 minutes of King Kong and Godzilla fighting, and it's just all generated on a computer. So none of it is great. And I know you're like, well, what do you expect, Joe? You think they could do Godzilla practically? You want them to find a real... Like, no! I want them to stop making these movies. Like, that's the point of this video. Because it's boring. Big CGI monster fights, to me, is boring. And it's nothingness. And these films have no plot in them. And they're just so dumb. And now we're getting this new one later this week that I'm going to see and I'm going to review. It's Godzilla and Kong fighting more CGI monsters. I don't care! Now, I know there's that show Monarch, Legacy of Monsters, which I've heard is much, much better. I've heard it's a big conspiracy show. It's got a lot of... It deals with the aftermath of these monster fights and the attacks, which... That seems a lot more interesting to me. That should be the movie story. Let's deal with the cleanup. What are these monsters? How do they actually affect our lives? I haven't watched the show, so I'm not really going to comment on if it's good or bad, but to me, that's a good concept. That's a direction that this franchise can go in, but it's not going to go in that direction. They're going to keep making these nonsense movies until people stop seeing them, which... Guys, stop seeing them. We deserve better. Godzilla Minus One proved that we deserve better. That was a movie with Godzilla, with a big gigantic CGI monster that did big crazy stuff and destroyed Japan, doing crazy amazing things with heat rays and explosions. It had all that stuff. But at its core, it was a personal story about this guy recovering from World War II, recovering from the fact that he was a kamikaze pilot that didn't go through with his job, and now he feels like he's not an honorable human being. Now he has this family to take care of, and Japan is trying to rebuild and recover. It's a movie rich with thematical stories and plot lines that make sense and grip you and bring you in to where you could take Godzilla out of the movie and you could still have a decent movie. Could you take Godzilla or King Kong out of any of these frickin' movies and still have something worth watching? No, you can't. So, yes. Is this the worst movie franchise ever? No, it's successful. The studio probably thinks it's the best thing they've ever come up with, but it's my least favorite. I hate it. I wish it would stop. I'm so sick of these movies. Just let's make something better. All right, guys, let me know. Let me know how I did. I'm ready for it. Tell me how terrible these takes are. Please make sure to subscribe, though. Like this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.